Is Trinity Turkson, and I'm currently a social work major at Meredith College, graduating in just a few weeks. And as part of my senior project, I wanted to focus on something meaningful to not just me personally, but something that would prompt really good communication and I think just knowledge for my community, and then for more of the students to come in. And this is what led me to organize the panel, Breaking the Chains, which is a conversation featuring topics about overcriminalization, reentry, sentencing, and overall restorative justice in North Carolina. This topic is important to me because I feel as if in our state alone, there are far too many individuals, especially of the Black and Brown communities, who are impacted by systems that punish them more than rehabilitate. And I really wanted to speak to that and talk about how overcriminalization and harsh sentencing can separate families, cause displacement, and make it really impossible for reentry to even happen for people that are just coming out of the criminal justice system. And that's really where restorative justice speaks to it, because restorative justice is a model that emphasizes healing, accountability, and overall emphasizes community repair. So with that being said, for our panelists that we have today, we have Brian Scott, we have Dr. Anthony Bennett, and Ms. Dawn Blagrove. And if you guys could introduce yourselves to the attendees and talk about your role in the community, the role in your organization, and overall just explain some knowledge that you have about restorative justice or any work that you do that ties to that.
Well, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Trinity, for inviting me. My name is Brian Scott. I am the executive director of Our Journey. Our Journey is a statewide nonprofit reentry organization here in North Carolina. We're a little bit over 3 years old now, and we have partnerships with the Department of Adult Corrections and 20 prisons of the 53 that are state correctional facilities, and continue to expand that. I'm formerly incarcerated myself. I was released in 2021 and launched Our Journey a year later, just because I saw too many people were falling through the gaps and wanted to be part of the solution, been part of the problem, and wanted to be part of the solution. So it's an honor to be here with you today, and I will pass it to Dawn.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Attorney Dawn Blagrove. I am the executive director of an organization called Emancipate NC. Emancipate NC is an organization that is committed to ending systemic and institutional racism, particularly within the criminal justice system, through an abolitionist lens. And yeah, that's the work that we do. We do that through impact litigation, through community trainings, through legislative advocacy, and policy advocacy on the municipal levels, as well as coordinated campaigns within the community to try to minimize the touch of law enforcement with people in marginalized communities, and to help people find an exit ramp off of off of the road to being justice involved. And we do that through all kinds of ways. So happy to be here. Thanks.
All right, thank you. My name is Dr. Anthony Bennett. I'm on faculty and staff at NC State University. I work on both sides of the house within our BSW and MSW program. I'm actually not in the field right now, but I'm working with our students who are will be placed in some of the agencies, dealing with restorative justice programs and things of that sort. My actual background, my research and study is actually in mental health and athletes, is my background. And this whole restorative justice part of it, for me within social work and athletics has really come to light to me probably within the past year, and really has sparked my interest in looking at more restorative justice programs, and using athletics as a part of that. Obviously dealing with, a lot of individuals that, look like me and come from my community that are involved in athletics, and using some of those some of those programs as restorative justice programs. Thank you. And again, Trinity, thank you so much for inviting us to speak on this panel. That's very important.
Thank you guys for all of your introductions and for sharing your impact and your experiences with restorative justice or just with communities in general. With that being said, I have prepared some questions for our panelists to answer that highlight all of the topics that we're going to be covering in the panel today. And if there's any outside questions from the attendees, you can refer them to the chat and then we can answer them at the end with the extra time that we have left. So for the first question, it's talking about understanding the impact of overcriminalization and sentencing. And I just wanted to know, in what ways have North Carolina's sentencing laws disproportionately affected marginalized communities? And what are some of the long-term consequences of overcriminalization? And if you'd like to, Ms. Dawn Blagrove, if you could start off.
And so how does North Carolina overcriminalize? Just like everybody else in America, it is through harsh sentencing, through draconian applications of the law, and because our systems are wrought with systemic and institutional racism that make it disproportionately likely that a Black or brown person, particularly Black people, will end up justice involved, not necessarily because Black people commit more crimes, just because they are grossly overpoliced. And because we are overpoliced, we are necessarily overcriminalized. Now, what are the problems with that? The problems with that are multitudinal. First of all, we have prisons that are overcrowded. And just for the record, of the 33,000 people in North Carolina prisons that are in prisons right now that are living in cages, about 98% of those people will eventually come back to our communities. So it is truly in our best interest to be able to rehabilitate those folks who need rehabilitating and help them reacclimate and re-enter into society so that they can be successful. The problem is that so much of North Carolina's economy is based on the prison industrial system. So many rural counties where prisons are located, their whole county budget exists around making sure that there are people inside of those prisons. The prisons are not safe. Because they cannot find adequate staffing. There's overcrowding, and there, frankly, is a revolving door that must be created and promulgated by the state in order for the economics of many rural counties to be able to stay intact. So the problem with overcriminalization, or the reason why we see so much overcriminalization, is because there is such a strong economic incentive for the state to keep prisons full of people. And that is one of the reasons why I believe we do not see the level of investment in reentry, and why, because of that, we see such a high recidivism rate. So that's just kind of a basic answer there.
One of the areas where we see over criminalization is as it relates to substance use disorder. Most experts today see that as a mental health issue, as just a health issue in general, and yet we see many people are incarcerated directly for drug-related offenses, and then for offenses that are connected with their substance use disorder. So I think we're seeing a shift in that. It's slow. It's like anything else when you're talking about a government and some of these entrenched policies. We've been told just say no, and that didn't work. And we've tried locking everybody up, and that hasn't worked. And now we have an opioid epidemic around the nation that is impacting people with criminal records even more. So I think if we can figure out that and work on defining that as a health issue and not a criminal justice issue, that could help with some of this overcrowding in our prisons, as Dawn mentioned.
And the only thing that the only thing that I'll add to that is, from the mental health aspect, it's really once that has been established, then also being able to have those resources to address those mental health issues, and being able to provide those resources that are out there to get assistance. Several organizations that are around the state, but I know kind of in Wake County and Durham County with the Acorns program and the Hearts program, I think could help out in some of those issues when some of those mental health concerns come up. And they're going out assisting with our law enforcement to kind of de-escalate the situation. So then they're not taking into custody um, for whatever behaviors there that are happening during that time. It's, to me, and again, this is my assumption, is that the behaviors is not an illegal behavior, but it's because of their mental health issues that can now not get them put in that system that's there, and they can really truly get the help, from the medical standpoint with mental health.
Thank you, guys. And also, in addition to that, and I know Ms. Dawn, you just spoke to this as well, but can you share insights about how overcriminalization and punitive policies that have been put into place have contributed to that cycle of incarceration and recidivism?
So, one of the big misconceptions about about mass incarceration in America is that there was this huge uptick in crime, and the reality is that's not what happened, and that's not how our prisons became overpopulated and how America became one of the largest incarcerators in the entire world. That happened because of district attorneys. So district attorneys are folks who have the power to decide in North Carolina what a person is going to be charged with and what they're not going to be charged with. And what we found was that after during the Nixon administration, when the Republican Party decided to run a campaign on law and order, what we found was that many prosecutors started over prosecuting things, charging more things than they normally would have charged in any situation. So that is one way that we get to this place. It is because district attorneys are given, and in North Carolina, district attorneys have a huge amount of leeway in actually the only oversight that your district attorney has is the voters. And they can charge whomever and whatever they like. So what we saw was that a district attorney would go from charging someone with possession of marijuana um, to charging someone with possession of marijuana, depending on the amount that they had, also intent to sell and distribute. Also, if they had a rolling papers, for example, they're also going to get charged with paraphernalia. Now, all of those charges can happen from the same incident. And that is how we end up with this overproliferation of people inside of prisons, is because district attorneys are charging people for multiple crimes based on one singular act of conduct, if that makes sense. The other thing is that sentencing laws are bad, and they're bad everywhere. But people are being sentenced to much longer periods of time than they were before for less punitive crimes, and there's very little chance to get out early or to work down your time, so to speak. So the overcriminalization of folks isn't really about a new proliferation of crime as much as it is about the way the system is being used in a way to create much longer, more draconian sentences and create much higher barriers for people um, to overcome or to ever be able to get back out of prison. I hope that makes sense.
And Don, thank you for that. And the thing I wanted to add to, and hopefully you can add a little bit to this, is this is some of the research that I've been looking at recently also too. And you brought up Nixon during that time. I think it was Clinton as well, when it started to happen with the mandatory minimum sentences and the three strikes law and the stop and frisk and things like that. I think all those things started to when those things started to happen also is when it kind of impacted black and brown, Hispanic populations, things like that within their community for mass incarceration. Is that kind of about right too?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's absolutely right. And then you also have to um, figure in, because I'm seeing our other panelists talk about his life sentence in Massachusetts and how different he was treated in Massachusetts than he is treated in North Carolina. And um, what we cannot afford to discount is the proximity to chattel slavery that exists in southern states and the overproliferation and the overpolicing of black folks that happens in southern states and the very draconian outcomes that happen for people even once they're released. I'm going to throw it over to our other panelists so he can talk about some of the very stark differences from being justice involved that exists in North Carolina, a southern state that was a slave state, as opposed to some place like Massachusetts where he was originally convicted.
Okay, I don't know if Jay Silva wants to comment on that. I don't believe he's
I am
officially.
Yeah.
so sorry, friend. I thought that was you. I am so
No,
sorry. That is my bad. I am so
that's me.
sorry.
That was just me. I I got a life sentence at 17 in New England, Massachusetts, and I went through the process. I was a little lucky. There was some educational programs and so on, but when I moved here, I was working in the prisons. I worked with the prison fellowship program as an academy person, a justice ambassador, and for me, it was very real. I'm working with guys. Most of the guys in the prison were black. First of all, I noticed that right away. Their numbers were greater than they were in New England. Guys were doing 20 years, and I thought that was a lot, 30. There's guys in there that had 50 years in, and we're in since 15. And and then parole. Parole hit me personally. I was on parole. I had freedom where I could travel. I'm very successful in a lot of different areas. I got down here and all of a sudden that was all taken away because I'm a justice involved person. I pay a fee. I'm monitored now. I can't leave the county. It's insane. And then I heard it was because of this whole old law or something against, black folks that were trying to vote and a whole bunch of different things. And it to me, it's insane. I'm ready to leave. I I just and I'm on parole till I die. So there is some relief. I could possibly go to court, but this will be the rest of my life here. And why should I deal with this down here? I'm fortunate though that I could probably do that. I could leave, but some folks aren't. So
That's right.
I'm just overwhelmed by it, and I just want to comment on that. So, but
So
thank
I'm
you.
so sorry for putting you on the spot.
It's okay. I
I'm so
just went to
sorry,
the
but
So we just spoke about this. I just went to the White House. I'm part of the prison. I don't mean to capitalize on the time, but I'll just try to be. So I joined a Justice Ambassador movement, and we argue or promote some of the justice reform bills, the Second Chance Act, Safe Supervision Act. I met with Senator Tillis. There were 40 of us. I was at the State House. You know, here I was one day doing a life sentence at Walpole. Now I'm at the State House. Why? Why are we here for this? Um, but I mean, even Josh Stein signed the proclamation. But you know, signing papers is one thing, but doing something about it is a whole nother story. Like we need to see some relief here, guys. So I'm actually barred now. On top of it, I've been doing prison fellowship academy teaching men life skills for almost 30 years. Connecticut, New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, Texas. And I get down to the Carolinas. I'm in here for 2 years at Davidson Correctional down in Lexington. And the warden does some NCI check and realizes that somebody made a mistake or something. He said, I don't really care what you've done. you're no longer allowed to come into my prison or any other prison in North Carolina. It's a joke. It's insane, you know. I,
So
And that's a story. That's a
yeah,
that's
story that we hear, like Brian is
yeah,
able to get into some prisons, but what he could, I'm sure we'll talk to, is that is something that we hear over and over here in North Carolina. It is very difficult to
it's
get at.
sad.
It's
so
very,
it's interesting. He can get into the state house or the White House, but can't get into a prison. So I think that's reflective of what we've seen a lot. I am fortunate enough to be able to go into most of the prisons that we partner with on our first aid reentry kit program and talk to the guys. I'm off parole. That is the biggest reason why I'm allowed to do that. But thank you for that. And I just want to share a couple of personal stories based upon what Dawn had said to just kind of put some flesh on it because when I was incarcerated, it was very common to meet a white person and a black person who were convicted, charged, and convicted of the same exact crime, but the black person always had a lengthier sentence. It was never the other way around. So that was very interesting to me, very telling to me. Also, it was interesting to me to find people who were separated only by the border of a county and that would determine the length of their sentence in many cases because one person would be in a county where they were charged much differently than in the county right next door. So you could literally live 10 miles apart and your sentences could be anywhere from 5 to 10 years different. And to me, that is not justice. And I know we don't have a perfect system and we never will, but it was very disheartening to meet people during my incarceration who could have been already rebuilding their lives if they had lived 10 miles the other direction.
and that is true. And that speaks directly to the power of district attorneys here in North Carolina because they can charge whatever they want. And what you'll look at is, and I know we need to get to we need to get to restorative justice soon, but this is super important. And district attorneys there in North Carolina, we have something called habitual felon status. Where if a person has been charged or convicted of 3 felonies, the district attorney has the option of charging them as a habitual and then sentencing them at least three sentencing levels higher than the crime that they actually committed. The statistics and the research show that there are very few, the way district attorneys use that sentencing mechanism varies wildly from one part of the state to the other, from one jurisdiction to the other. And you could have someone with 20 convictions who ends up and it's also deeply racially divided. It's used, habitual felon status is used much more often on Black folks and other people of color than it is on white folks. So what you find is this incredible disproportionate sentence lengths, like Brian was just talking about, for the exact same offenses. And it is disheartening, and it creates these real barriers and breakdowns to surviving communities on the outside, what it does to those families, because not just one person goes to prison, everybody in a family goes to prison. Whether it, even when it's not physically, it is still spiritually, it is still mentally, they are still living with that stigma, and they are also still feeling the impact of that missed income in their households. So yeah, we could talk about this all day. So, but let's go to something more hopeful. How about that?
Right. And Don, let me just add one more thing to that, because in some of my research that I'm doing right now, and I know you said it's a drastic difference between one part of state and another part of state, but in me going back and doing some of my research, I've seen a difference when you talk about district attorneys thing that between Wake County and Durham County. I mean, you're talking about counties that butt each other. That's a difference.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
difference
So we talk about across the state because you could be a rural area, no, but states that counties that are butting each other when you talk about district attorneys and the way that they charge and do things that are just right next to each other.
Right, and I can speak very specifically to the difference between Wake and Durham. Durham has a very progressive district attorney, Satana DeBerry. Wake has both Democrats, Wake has Lauren Freeman, both of whom I work closely with. One I work much more acrimoniously than the other. But I will say that the difference between, yes, and you're literally talking about the matter of crossing a county line. Your outcomes and the prospects of what can happen if you end up justice involved in Wake County is drastically different than the options that you have in Durham. Specifically in Durham County, what you're going to find is that you have a robust restorative justice system that exists within that district attorney's office that has been embraced by that district attorney's office, and you do not have that in Wake County. And the difference in the outcome, the difference in how victims are treated and how they come out on the other side of traumatic events, but most importantly about how people who go through the justice system, who are touched by the justice system, are able to not have that be the defining moment in their life is incredible. It's just incredible.
So speaking to that of what you were talking about, how the restorative justice system or programs that are in Durham are more vast than it is in Wake County, and anyone can chime in for this one. But what successful restorative programs do you know that currently exist in North Carolina, and what can be done to expand these efforts statewide?
I want to highlight one. We just recently attended the annual reentry conference in Raleigh, the 1st of April. And they had a presentation by some folks at Campbell University that are actually partnering with DAC to do a restorative justice program inside the facilities when possible. They've only been able to do two so far, but essentially what they've done is they have brought the victims of crime into the prisons, which is something that has never been done before in North Carolina. And they've actually allowed them to, now this is the victim initiated. It's not something initiated by the person who committed the crime. And but if everybody agrees to it, they come into the prison, they sit across from each other, and there is no time limit on this. In fact, they talked about a session that lasted 7 hours, and there was even the possibility of the victim coming back the next day if she had wanted to. And I was just really moved by that because one of the things that bothers me a little bit for those of us who work in the reentry space is there's a lot of focus on helping people rebuild their lives after incarceration. And as somebody who was incarcerated, obviously that's why we launched our journey. And we often talk about how we don't want people to define us by our past. And amen. Again, that's so important. But oftentimes, victims of crime are defined by our past. And that can last for years and decades for the rest of their lives. And so I think that we need to make sure that we give space, even as we applaud second chances and we talk about how important that they are, that we don't lose sight of the space that victims need to experience healing. And that's why I was so excited to learn more about this program at Campbell University and the way they are bringing together people in a restorative justice model that is having an impact on people's lives. So I wanted to highlight that program.
And the heart of restorative justice and what you're talking about the victims is so important because as a community, what we need to do and as a society is decouple the idea that incarceration and sending someone to prison for committing a crime, that punishment somehow works to solve the wound of the victim, because it does not. That's what research shows us. That's what studies show us, that it doesn't. That sending someone to prison does not make your victim feel better. Does not, and it doesn't make your victim whole. Right? There are some situations, obviously, in cases of murder and things like that, where someone is gone and that the harm is irreparable, where people cannot ever be made whole. But there are so many more situations where people can be, right? And from talking to people who have done restorative justice, where the victim and the perpetrator are allowed to come together and speak, one of the things that I think we hear over and over again is that the victim just want to understand, why did you do this? Why? They just want basic answers. Like, why did you do this? What were you thinking? Are you a monster? Or tell me something about how you end up in this place. Because and spoiler alert, there are very few monsters. Most people who commit crimes are people who have been hurt before, are people who are living in extreme poverty, are people who have mental health issues, are people who simply do not know another way to survive, right? And so when victims and perpetrators are able to come together, and this is why I think it is so dangerous for the status quo for restorative justice programs to be getting the air that they are getting right now, is because what we find is that throwing people away in prison and spending millions and billions of dollars on the prison industrial system serves no one but the state and its economy. It does not serve the victims. It does not serve the people who have committed harm against other people. And what really does serve those folks is things like, if you stole my lawnmower, right? I want you to have to, when I buy another lawnmower, your restorative justice is you come and cut my lawn every 2 weeks for a year or for 6 months or for whatever. And what that does, y'all, is recidivates, or it doesn't recidivate, but it rehabilitates. It forces a perpetrator to see their victim as a real person and to develop interpersonal relationships and to create community, because that's really what restorative justice is about. Is less about creating us and them, and reminding all of us that we are all human beings in various states and forms, and that together we are stronger than we are if we are separated and apart and are compartmentalizing one another and determining and giving these blanket type categories, because that's just not how people work. And other societies know that. You know what I mean? You look at prison systems in other industrialized countries around the world, and what you'll see is that they are all much more focused on getting those folks back into society in a way that is safe and that is healthy and makes them productive, but also holds them accountable to the person to whom they caused harm. And that is what restorative justice is all about.
And Don and Brian, I'm so excited to hear about that program at Campbell, and Don, the way you just broke it down in the most simplest form, it really goes back and it speaks to the core principles of restorative justice. Now you go back to the core, when you talk about inclusion and participation. So you have inclusion and participation by both parties. You have some accountability there along with support. That's going to be there. Along with that, you're having dialogue and communication. And that's also helping with repairing the harm that was done and making amends with that. And so I do believe that speaks to the core values of restorative justice. And one of the things that you said earlier, Don, that I think about this, and I use this all the time when I'm talking to people, is, and you said it correctly. Hurt people hurt people. Hurt people hurt people. And it's just a way of trying to figure out, okay, what do we do from then? Because if a hurt person hurts somebody, if you put them away in a cage, that's not fixing anything. They're still hurt. And the person who was hurt is still hurt. So what, again, and going back to this restorative justice thing, how do we then give the restorative justice to help the person who hurt somebody and then the person who's hurt?
And I could just say, and I don't think I mentioned it, but prior to being the executive director of Emancipate and See, I worked for almost 10 years with North Carolina Prisoners Legal Services as a post-conviction attorney. As part of my job, I spent lots of time inside of prisons talking to people who had done, some of them really unspeakable things, right? Most of them not, to be honest with you, but some of them really ghastly things. And what I can tell you again is when I say that there are very few monsters, there are very few monsters. I don't think I ran into anyone who I thought was unable to rematriculate into society, not just to rematriculate, but to be a benefit to society because of what they had been through. Never, not in my entire legal career, have I met someone and I walked away from a prison visit and thought that person don't never need to get out. I have never thought that, ever. Um, what you will find is that when we humanize people that we throw into cages, it's much, much harder to throw them into cages, which is why our criminal justice system is built the way it is, and why something that seems so logical, like a restorative justice programs, is so reticent to take off because it does not serve the status quo. And so what you have to really think about, and especially as students in social work, is less about punitive and punishing people for their behavior and much more about understanding what got this person here. Because I guarantee you, I have spoken to so many people who have done some really terrible things, and none of them, as a child, wanted to be a prisoner when they grew up. None of them. But that is a question that I had to learn as a practicing attorney to ask my clients. Who are you? How did this happen? What did you want to be when you grew up? And I think as social workers, it is imperative that when you go into people's households and you go into people's homes and you are seeing people at their absolute worst sometimes, instead of asking, how can I punish? The question that we should all reorient ourselves to, and the paradigm shift that we need to see, is what does this person need to be whole? What does this person need to be successful? What does this family need to be able to rise above this circumstance? And that, at its essence, is what restorative justice is. It is really about a paradigm shift around what it is that we as people in community with one another owe each other, right? Even those who have harmed others, what is it that we owe them? Right? What is it that they are entitled to? What accountability do they need to have for their actions? But also, what accountability do we as a society hold for allowing this person to be drugged to this state of disrepair? Right? Because and I think that it's so much easier to do them versus us, and criminals against non-criminals, and bad people and good people, because it absolves the rest of us of the responsibility and the accountability that we have for creating societies where people cannot live without hurting other people.
And I guess to add on to that too, you know, this society, unfortunately, um, because it's big business, as you said earlier, it's easier to dehumanize them and put them in the prison system, breaking up families. And that's how that cycle starts, in Trinity. I like your I think that's part of your title. How do you break that chain? Because when you dehumanize and put one person in jail, that's going to affect at least 3 or 4 generations. It's not just that person. It's 3 or 4 generations that happens as a result of putting that one person in their mind, throwing that one person away, and we're not going to worry about that. But you're not worried about the 4 other generations that's coming after that's going to be impacted by that one person off of an ounce of weed.
Right. And I think Jay Silva wanted to jump in, but I do want to add, I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Very, very, very racially polarized city, one of the most segregated cities in the country consistently. The zip code that I grew up in, 53216, in Milwaukee, 65% of Black men between the ages of 18 and 65 will spend at least 1 year in prison. 65%, right? So when you talk about the generational harm that that creates, and also what what these children and people that live in the, when you live somewhere where 65% of the people there are going to go to prison at some point, it is hard for you not to believe that it is inevitable for that to be also your fate. And with restorative justice, I think what we can do is um, create off ramps for folks to be able, even these children who live in communities like this, to understand that there are alternatives, that there are options, that you are not a bad person, that someone is not a bad person because they end up in prison. Maybe it's just because of a certain set of circumstances, right? And that you are not fated to live that same life. All right, I'm gonna pass it back to Jay.
I appreciate all you guys added to that. And so I went to prison at 17, and obviously, I have to be honest, if I went to prison at 17, obviously something was wrong. But I didn't know what was wrong. And there was no reentry in the 70s. It was really I lived in a extremely violent and so on. But there was an opportunity, like Brian mentioned, where we got to meet victims of crime. And I had this overwhelming sense of I was in there for murder. I was in there for second degree murder. I went to a trial. I confessed the whole thing. So when I sat across somebody that wanted to talk about how they were victimized, the woman looked at me, and I thought I was I thought I was following the program well and so on, and I was just following the program. And she says, "It seems like you don't have any empathy." And to be truthfully honest, I just sat there, I took it, and I had to go back to my cell. I got out a dictionary because I didn't even know how to read and write at the time. I had to look it up, and I had to look up the word empathy. And when I looked it up, it just made my life even worse. But it was a trigger. It was a trigger for me that said, no, I don't want to be that. So I had to alignment. For me, one of the things was that program and those people and their caring. You have to align yourself. You have to surrender to folks as you come in. That's a big thing. For us to be able to say, I trust you, I need you, I want you. Well, can I stand beside you and you guide me through this journey? That's a big, big, big problem for us that are broken, when we're in there. Even when you talk about, for us that of faith, we say, our Father in heaven, right? Well, how do we do that when our Father either raped us, beat us, and those areas of trust, those areas of healing, those areas, so I throw that out there, that I think, Brian, that's what some of that helps, but, a lot of that really needs to be in there. That's why guys return. You get these avenues of where you go, and then there's a little break. You don't have somebody that you can actually align yourself for a mold, a model, a true mentor, a true guide. So what do? We go back to what all the other 65% of the other men do and know, right? That's really key on reentry. So I just want to throw that out there. Um, thank you.
Brian, jump in, please.
Well, I want to make sure we get to all of our questions, but I would definitely agree with everything that I heard there. Most of the people that I met during my incarceration, the vast majority, really genuinely felt remorse for what they had done. This is something that you don't see. Hollywood doesn't portray it that way. Hollywood portrays it as, we go in and we talk about our crimes and plan new ones. And that just wasn't my experience. There were exactly two people that I met during my 20 years of incarceration that I thought that's why they build prisons for. And to Don's point, I mean, I'm in there with them all the time. So it's telling that there were only two out of all of that group. There are people serving natural life sentences in North Carolina that if they got their chance out here with us, they would be outstanding citizens. Because most of the people who receive natural life sentences um, committed their crime in a heat of passion that will probably never be duplicated in their lives. And they've also had a lot more time for introspection. They've taken that difficult journey, and so we may never see them out here in the free world. They may be that 2% that don't come back out. But there are so many of them that I met that I would love to have as neighbors, and I think you would love to have as neighbors as well.
Well, the conversation was getting so good. I don't even want to move on from the topic. But so I know we did talk about reentry or just barriers to reentry. So I was just going to move down to policy and advocacy change, if that's okay with everyone. Um, and for question number 7, from a legal and policy standpoint, what reforms are urgently needed to reduce overcriminalization and improve reentry outcomes in North Carolina?
So Dawn and Dr. Bennett are probably best qualified to answer this question because our journey doesn't do a lot of direct advocacy. But here's something I want to say again from personal experience. I've had some conversations. We enjoy a great relationship with the Department of Adult Corrections, and I believe that there are people, especially on their reentry side, who are true believers in this process. And we've had the opportunity to talk to them about post-released reentry. But we often hear, including from DAC, the expression that reentry starts on day one. And one of the things that I've had the opportunity to talk with some DAC officials about, and I really want us to see us talk about more and focus on more, is the reentry experience is directly impacted by trauma. And in other words, it isn't just finding a place to live, it isn't just finding a job, it's overcoming the trauma that incarceration causes. So one of the things that we have to do is find a way to make our prison systems less adversarial. I was recently in one of our state correctional facilities, and it's only been 4 years since I was released, but I was amazed to see that the guards now look like they're part of a SWAT team. Many of them actually have tasers that they wear into the blocks. They have to go through a training procedure to do that. And it always bothered me that there was this us against them um, atmosphere inside our prisons. I attended a conference and learned last year and learned that the average lifespan of a correctional officer is 55 years. Out of all of law enforcement, they have the highest mortality rate. And that's because we put them in a situation and we tell them they're at war and we tell them that that they're in there with a bunch of offenders. And this is what happens. So it wears down our officers, which is why we have a 40% vacancy rate across our correctional facilities in North Carolina. And it certainly has an impact on the individuals who will one day rejoin us in society. So how we treat people while they're incarcerated has a direct impact on how they will return and how they will assimilate back into our society. One of the things that we tell our clients, people coming out of prison, is that prison mentality that you needed to survive will cause you problems out here. And so we have to work with them to help them through the trauma of incarceration. And so, again, we are not the policy experts. I will defer to my other two panelists. But as someone who has experienced incarceration, I want us to find a way to make our system less adversarial and more really taking it to heart that reentry starts on day one. How are we preparing for people for release throughout their entire incarceration?
And
Hey,
so,
hey, Don.
Brian, I
Hey,
want to
Don.
say that while I might spend more time steeped in policy, um, my policy and the work that I do is always informed by people just like you who have been inside, who have real lived experience, because nobody knows how to fix a problem better than the person who has been subjected to that problem. So, what Brian was talking about is is institutionalization, right? And one of the biggest barriers to reentry is being institutionalized. Now, let me be clear about something. So many of us don't have a real idea of what prison is because you've never been there. I spend a lot of time in prisons, and I know every time I go into one that I'm going home. I'm going to leave out of that space, but that never makes it any unnerving, any less unnerving to walk into a closed space, have one door closed behind me, and then have no control or autonomy of the door in front of me, right? And even though I'm only in that situation for a brief moment as an attorney, coming in and going out of that prison, it is so unnerving. As much as I do, I've spent the last 20 years of my life dedicated to this work. And I never, ever, ever stop breathing, stop having this huge sigh of relief when I'm back in my car in the parking lot and outside of a prison. Um, it does something to you on a molecular level to be unable to control your movements, your thoughts, your meals, your bedtime, your wake up time, what you can do, who you can talk to. It is when I worked for Prisoners Legal Services, I worked with one of my colleagues had a client who had been in prison for 20 years. And she was able to get him released. And she took him to a grocery store when he got out to help him get some food and get set up or whatever. He stood in the cereal aisle for probably 20 minutes because he was completely overwhelmed by the amount of choices that he had in cereal, right? To the point, and I could tell you these kind of stories forever and ever. I'm going to court with some guy who's been in prison for 20 years, and I'm talking to him and we're having a consultation before we go into court, and he is fascinated with my iPhone because he's never seen one, and he don't have enough money or anybody on the outside to put enough money on his books for him to be able to buy an illegal one inside. Like, there are things that we take for granted about the reentry process that just are set folks up for failure, right? Just the deinstitutionalization. One of the more heartbreaking stories is I had a friend who came home from prison and was at a party at a friend's house, and he had gone to the bathroom and he had been gone for a really long time. So they go to check on him, and he's literally standing at a door waiting for someone to open the door so that he can go through, right? Now, it sounds crazy, but when you are so deeply institutionalized, when you have been treated like an animal for so long, it is so that you don't just flick a switch and undo that institutionalization. And so the policy that I think one of the policies that would be most beneficial on reentry is for everyone who's coming home to have sustained therapy, to have a whole area of psychiatry that's dedicated to deinstitutionalizing people who have served time in prison or been in a cage, because it is the smallest things that will end those folks back up inside of prison. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who have done long periods of time, who will tell me, I am afraid to go outside. I don't know. Everybody I know is dead. Everybody who loved me doesn't love me anymore. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I'm afraid to go home. I don't have a home to go to, right? And we as a society should feel deep shame that is the experience of anyone, no matter what they have done, right? But because we don't talk to these people, because we make them subhuman, we make them disposable, it doesn't matter, and we don't have to talk to them. So I think the biggest policy is these folks need help. They need psychological help. I think another policy is there are people who are spending time in prison that they shouldn't be spending. Not because they're innocent, because it is absolutely ridiculous. And at some point, it becomes you get diminishing returns on holding someone in a cage. I personally believe at any point, but I think that many people we have inside of prisons should not be there. There is nothing more for them to gain. Society is not safer, and the state is poorer, and the people of the state are poor because we are holding those people in cages unnecessarily. There should be drastic sentencing overhaul that should be happening. There should be much more time for people to make that transition back into home. And so the policy that we would want to see is something to the lines of, if you get sentenced to 5 years in prison, 3 of those years, a solid 3 of those years, should be in a halfway house or something where you are learning a trade, where you are going to technical, where you are doing something to help you matriculate and help the transition from prison to freedom be something that is digestible and that is psychologically, physically, emotionally and physically and psychologically, that a person is prepared to come back into society, right? That is, like, if we're really talking about rehabilitation, the kinds of policy changes that we advocate for at Emancipate are those that speak directly to the person. We invest so much as a society in institutions, in prisons, in criminal justice systems, and so little into people. And if we took just a fraction of the money that we invest in upholding a criminal justice system that clearly is not working, because let's just be, just from a common sense place, America incarcerates more people than any other industrialized country in the world, and also has more crime than any other industrialized country in the world. So just basic math tells you that something is amiss, right? Like, if the solution to crime is throwing people away, and nobody throws away more people than we do, nobody cages more people than we do, and we still have more crime than any other industrialized country, maybe prison isn't the way to stop that. Maybe it is investing in people. Maybe it is not using entry into the criminal justice system as the only way you can get access to services that people should have. If they had access to those services and those resources on before they went into prison, they maybe never would have gotten there. These are the kind of very common sense policy changes that folks like Emancipate and other organizations around the state are advocating for. It is a heavy lift. There's very little appetite right now in this political climate, and honestly, in any political climate, for that kind of work and that kind of thought. But the reality is that even if we can't see it happen today, we have to keep talking about it. Hell, in North Carolina, it took us 20 years to raise the age of majority for criminal prosecution from 16 to 18. 20 years. Everybody in North Carolina who was 16 years old that was charged with any crime was charged as an adult at 16, all the way up until 2019. We just got to keep pushing. So those are the policy changes. And while it feels futile in this moment, it is not futile, because it takes time to change hearts, takes time to change minds, and you have got to just keep beating that drum. So those are the advocacy points that we deal with.
And it's hard to follow that up, Don. It is hard to follow up what you just said. What I really want to do is want to try to find the plate to pass the plate around so we could, but the thing that I will add to that, and it's something that's along that line, but kind of different, and some of the work that I've been doing with some clients as well, is, Brian, you made a good you made a reference, gave a statistical point about the guards in the prison system. I can't remember the exact number. I think you said the mortality is what, 55 or something like that. Just think about this. On the flip side of that, all of those prison guards, they are exactly what Don said also. They are institutionalized. They are institutionalized. They are spending the majority of their time behind the walls. And this is verbiage that they use with me. I spend the majority of my time behind the walls and I spend with my family. Then when I come from beyond the walls, that, as you said, when you go in, you got to wait for somebody to push a button. You got to do this and do that. Then I got to come back out into the real world of where we've been dehumanized, that word, all of these people.
Dehumanized.
Yeah, all of these people here, and now we're expected now to come back into the community. If we were to do research about it, just think about how many of those guards also now are in broken family situations. When you talk about, you know, it's, and I'm not even talking about just the prisoners who are behind the walls, but the prison guards that impacts those generations. And as Don said, it's the community support with those people. Now you have the broken social networks. You also have, the lack of reentry programs that are out there to be. But I also think when you talk about reentry programs, it's also that mental health for those guards who have to go in and work with those individuals behind the wall, because there's going to continue to be this stigma and isolation that comes outside. Then you come back for opioid addiction, alcohol addiction, all these other addictions that are part of them, because they have to find a way to be able to turn it off when they come outside of those walls. Don, I couldn't give no more of what you gave, because you gave it all. I can only go the other way with that. You're muted, Don.
The link I just included, if for those of you who haven't seen it before, is a Wikipedia page about the Stanford prison experiment, and it speaks directly to what Anthony was just talking about, and about how quickly that institutionalization happens, how quick and what those dynamics do to everyone involved in the prison industrial complex. It's really incredible. If you haven't seen it or heard of it, I would encourage you to at least read the Wikipedia page and do a little more research about it, because it's incredible.
I wanted to move down to. Sorry, I don't know what to say. There we go. I wanted to move down to like the personal and professional perspectives, since everyone has done a great job at talking about your role, and then just how overcriminalization has affected everyone in different ways, and then even speaking to the guards that also work in those prison systems as well. I wanted to know what experiences, either personal or professional, have shaped your understanding of the justice system and the reinforcement that's needed for restorative justice and sentencing reform.
Well, um, it was very personal for me. I had never had much interaction with the criminal legal system, and so it was very personal. And one of the things that benefited me when I was released was there were individuals who I met during my incarceration who were became close friends, and they were released before me. In fact, it seemed like everybody was released before me. I kept waiting for my day. But when I was released, they formed a safety net around me, and they were there for me. My family, I had great family support. I'm very grateful for that. They gave me a place to live and help meet some of the immediate needs that I have. But nobody could understand what it was like to be incarcerated and released from incarceration in my family. It was these friends, it was this band of brothers who were there for me. They texted me. They were there for me when I was overwhelmed. That they were there for me when I honestly thought it might be better going back to prison than having to face all of these challenges where it seemed like society was, hell bent to make it difficult. And they were there to prop me up and to encourage me. And that's something that unfortunately most people who are incarcerated don't have. And when they come home, they don't have it. They don't have that support. And so that experience was why we launched our journey. And in fact, the name is very significant because while we are grateful for all of the people who support us and are on our board and part of our team without lived experience, this is our journey. We're there for each other. And I think that something that we haven't talked about today, but something that we believe is vitally important is peer support. And that is not just for people with SUDs. That is for people who are hurting to be helped by people who have been hurt themselves and have already progressed down that pathway. And so that's kind of how we see our journey is to fill those roles and to fill those gaps and to let people know. We want people to know, first of all, coming out of prison, that they are valued, that we love them, that they are important, that they have intrinsic value. And Again, that's something that people don't hear. Look, we who are formerly incarcerated, we don't expect society to roll out the red carpet for us. Okay, we understand. We're not, veterans coming back from battle. We understand that. But, but we do need to know that we're loved and that we're important. And we do need to have common sense policies in place that make it easier for us to assimilate back into society. When you hear about somebody who got out of prison 2 days ago and robbed a convenience store across from the police department and sat down on the sidewalk afterwards, don't shake your head and say, what a dummy, because that was strategic. It was intentional on that person's part. We don't want that to happen. We want people coming out of prison to know that they're loved and valued, and then we want to take it a step further and give them the resources and the support that they need. And all of that I've just said was informed by my own experience of incarceration.
I think I think Brian just kind of dropped the mic on that for us. But I do know that one of the things that I am proudest of is that my work and the work of Emancipate NC not only is informed by formerly incarcerated people, they are also integral parts of our team. Kerwin Pittman, who did 11 and a half years, came home and is just an incredible advocate for Inside. And one of the things that, as a professional, I want to say to you all is this. Um, we have so much education and schooling, so we think we know better. We think we know more. We think we're smarter, right? Than the people who have this real lived experience. And you are not. Hear me when I tell you, you are not. As my team sometimes works through litigation against prisons or against law enforcement agencies, one of the most important parts of preparing that litigation so that it's truly impactful is touching base with our friends and colleagues who have been formerly incarcerated. And they will tell you, well, you can ask for that, but here's what really happens, right? Here's what's really going to happen. If you want to make some real change inside of that prison, ask for this. If you want to really see an impact on the people who are dealing with these problems, ask for that. Always know that your work has got to be informed by the people who have real lived experience, that what they say and what they do in any system never matches completely. And it is in that mismatch, that misalignment, where so much of your good work will fall to the wayside and will not be impactful because you are not, you are incapable of having the information that you need to actually create the change that you want to create if you are not actively involving people who have real lived experience with those systems and with the way those rules and policies are applied inside. So that is my last word.
And I just dropped a link to our Journey's website in the chat, along with my email address in case anyone would like to reach out.
I also wanted to say, before we come to a closing, I wanted to know if anybody that attended have any questions for our panelists that we haven't already addressed. Now's the time to drop your question in the chat.
I would just ask, so Brian, I kind of know your organization. I've been followed on Facebook, but Dawn, could you put your group in there as well so I see it? Thank you.
I had a question. It's all right. All right. So one of the things that I took away from this is Dr. Bennett said in one of his follow-ups, what do we do from here? And I think that that's a good question, like maybe for closing. So what do we do from here and what work do we need to do? The people that have attended this panel and have listened, what's the work that can be done and like what change can people make in focusing on how to right these past wrongs and like breaking down the system in our everyday lives?
I love that question because a lot of times when I speak and I'm on panels, people say, what is the state not doing that the state needs to do? And my response to that always is, of course, there are things that the state needs to do, but these folks belong to us. They don't belong to the state. They belong to our communities. They belong to our churches, our places of worship. Their children go to school with our children. They grocery shop with us. And so it is incumbent upon us to do more. And one of the things that you can do is certainly get involved with Dawn and her group on the advocacy part of it. There's a lobby day coming up in a couple of weeks, or I believe maybe even next week in Raleigh, where you will have the opportunity to talk with legislators about second chance opportunities and gather with other people. But even more locally, there are things that you can do. Many of our counties have reentry councils that are trying to bring people together for the purpose of supporting people coming home. You can be a part of that council. It's open to anybody who wants to be a change maker in your community. Certainly encourage your church. Churches have a huge role to play in this and places of worship. So those are some practical things. Also, if I imagine we're preaching to the choir today. I imagine most of the people on this call are already really in tune with these issues. But if you've never gone through a reentry simulation where you actually take on what it's like to be recently released, I would encourage you to do that and to invite other people to do that. We've seen real change because of reentry simulations where even judges who have gone through them have said, you know what, this has made me rethink how I do my job. So those are just some suggestions. I'm sure Dawn and Dr. Bennett have others.
Dr. Moore, I'm sorry, go ahead, Doc.
Out real quick, I was just going to say, start close, right? The chances are that you know people who are just as involved, who have family members that are incarcerated, who are recently coming home. I would say at the very least, treat them like human beings, right? Reach out to those folks, make them a part of your community in real ways, right? Invite them, invite listen, if you have children, there are so many children of incarcerated people who are ostracized and treated like pariahs by other families and other children. Make sure those babies get an invitation to the birthday party too. I mean, it doesn't have to be something grand. It can be something really small that can make a huge difference in the lives of individual people. And we have the opportunity to lead by example, and we should do that. And big shout out to Judge Kendra Montgomery, who's on in our chat right now, who does some incredible work around justice restoration. I mean, restorative justice in Durham from the bench inside of the legal system in a way that is just incredible. So.
And you know what? I did not see that, but I'm gonna get a little personal real quick with Judge Montgomery there. It's nice to see you. But I'm gonna add to this. This was kind of a I knew this question was coming from Dr. Moore, and the reason why I say that is because we do a lot of work together. So although I didn't realize that it was going to come. The question of that she always asks is what's next? And so the reason why I'm going to speak also from the micro level, but it impacts the macro level. At the micro level, what I'm going to say is what we can do is vote. What we can do is vote, and not only vote, but vote down ballot. When you vote down ballot, it's going to impact the macro piece of it. Because when we start talking about it other time, some of these roles of the district attorneys around the state, if you're voting down ballot and really voting those right people in those right positions, sitting in those seats, to be able to impact those the outcomes of some of these outcomes of some of these people here. So that's kind of what I was when you talk about what's next, that's really from the micro level that impacts the macro level.
And if I could, we had a great question asked in the chat about restorative justice used in a broader legal context. I don't know of anything in North Carolina. However, I was able to take a tour of the Red Hook Center Justice Center in Brooklyn last year and was really impressed with how they have turned around a community that was crime ridden into really just an oasis there in Brooklyn as it relates to these issues, using some of the things that you've mentioned, such as family court, protective orders. We had the opportunity to sit in on a legal proceeding that was entirely different than any legal proceeding you've ever seen. It was in a courtroom that had all kinds of natural light. The judge was on the level of everybody else. It was still formal in the sense that it was a courtroom and there was decorum that was followed, but it was much more personable, and it was with the intention of helping people avoid some of the long-term effects of long-term incarceration. So the Red Hook Justice Center is a model for that around the nation, and I had the privilege of going and taking the tour there. Very, very impressed.
Hey, Brian, can you also give us that program that you talked about earlier with Campbell Law?
I'll be glad to. Trinity, I'm
Put that
assuming
in the
that you're
chat.
going to send out, if we have time before we close the chat, I will. I'll have to pull it up, but
Okay.
if not, then Trinity, I'm sure we'll be sending out some sort
Okay.
of email to all the participants, and I can definitely include it in that as well.
Thank you.
So thank you guys for all being here today and for the insight. And thank you, Mr. Silva, also for sharing your lived experiences. And then, just like all of our panelists have said, at its core, restorative justice is not about us versus them. It's about coming together as a community to help those affected feel loved, feel important, and feel valued, and to overall promote healing towards creating a lasting and good community for all of us. So thank you again for attending. Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Trinity.
Yes, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. I dropped that in the chat, but if it gets closed out too soon, I'll make sure we include it in the email as well. Thank you.